This is a Willets Point Shea Stadium bound 7 express train. The next and last stop is Willets Point Shea Stadium.
We're going to, do a year in review of what happened. I'm not going to do grades because, I feel like it's so weird to do grades being a person that has, never played in the major leagues. And I'm giving, Pete Alonso, B plus for his season. But, let's look back on this season. And I go back to our last episode we had together. We talked about the betting odds and they had the Mets at 92.5 to 93.5 wins. I had them between 92 and 95. You had them at 93. They end up going 74 and 87, fourth place finish in the NL East. And, it sucks to say this, and I never wanted to admit it, but it just kept coming back. It all started with Edwin Diaz going down at the WBC. I mean, that kind of, took the wind out of the sails. I thought the Mets were going to be able to overcome that, especially with a seasoned vet like David Robertson, who, he pitched extremely well, more than we thought he was going to pitch for the Mets, and did his job. He ended up getting traded. From there, obviously the hitting had the struggles that it did last year, very inconsistent. But, when you're asking a team to be a playoff team, and then you want to infuse 2, 3, 4 rookies into the lineup and expect them to save this team, it just doesn't work like that. And, the baby Mets got instituted into the team. Struggles all year for Brett Beatty. You had struggles and some good stuff from Mark Vientos. Francisco Alvarez, although the average was low, the guy hit 25 home runs. What a blessing he's been. And not on top of that, his defense was, his pitch calling and pitch framing was very important to the team. They brought up Ronnie Mauricio within the last month, and we saw some glimpse of him as well, doing well. But it was the pitching, right? It was the pitching that was the death nail in the coffin for this team. And it wasn't even really the bullpen to start. I think the bullpen got crushed because the starters couldn't go 5 innings. We were barely getting 3-4 innings from Scherzer to start. Verlander had some tough outings where he was giving us 4 or 5 innings. Cookie Carrasco gave us absolutely nothing. We were adjusting to Kodai Senga to the rotation, who needed time, and eventually we saw the real Kodai Senga towards the end of the season. It was just a struggle. I'm going to get your thoughts on this. I just want to go through some of the stuff here. Some of the positives. Francisco Lindor, 30-30. Yep. And I was very impressed with him towards the latter half of the season because I'm a big average guy. I know that there are people that don't care about average anymore. We don't see it on the screen anymore. We see OPS, which I'm not going to say that that's not important. But to me, average is still something that's important. And the fact that he got his average, let me see, he was around 212. He got it to 254. He was struggling. Alonso, we know that it was hitting 220, although he hit 46 home runs and he had over 100 RBIs. Same thing with Kyle Schwarber. I was watching this weekend. The guy's batting 198, but has 47 home runs and 101 RBIs. Like this is talking about believing in all the numbers just way too much and less feel for hitting. But Lindor probably had the best offensive season. You go to the pitching staff, and you mentioned it, Kodai Senga. The guy could possibly get votes, will definitely get votes for the Rookie of the Year, should get some votes for the Cy Young. And you look at what he did this season, going 12-7 with a 2.98 ERA. We're talking about numbers since Doc Gooden with the strikeouts, over 200 strikeouts he had. I think he had a 202 he ended up having this season. Those were the two. If you go hitting, pitching, those were the two tops. I like to throw in a career year for Brandon Nimmo, who had a career year in home runs. I think he was very complete. He batted 274. Pete Alonso was very uneven for me. It felt, Dave Kingman-esque for him with the low average and the home runs. And then we talked about the baby Mets. And then the trade deadline, right? Like that's the other big thing, the trade deadline and the stacking of the farm. You get rid of Scherzer, Verlander, Robertson, Pham, Escobar, and Canna. You bring in Luis Angel Acuna, Ryan Clifford, Drew Gilbert, Marco Vargas, and Ronald Hernandez. And they did bring in some other guys as well. But, your thoughts on wrapping up this season, your takeaways, the good and the bad.
The good and the bad. I'm gonna start with the good. I'm gonna start with the good on some of the parts of the young players, right? Because I think the good is Francisco Alvarez. You heard all about his hitting coming up. I'm like you. I'm an average guy. I don't care what everybody says because average tells me very succinctly how successful you are at the plate, right? I talked about this earlier. I said baseball's a game where you're really good if you succeed 30% of the time as a hitter, right? Like you're really good if you do that. So you're exceptional if you get over 35% of the time. And so for me, with him, he didn't have a high average. It was what, just above? Was it 209 or was it something around there?
I'll check that.
That he got. I check. I might have that wrong.
Yes,
with
209.
Alvarez. It was 209. Okay, he was about 209, right? But he showed you he's got power. I actually go to the point that you made. I was really impressed with his defense, which was the thing that people were very concerned about him coming up at the next level, and his ability to handle the pitching staff. So now I'm like, okay, you got that. Alvarez is way too good of a hitter from the talent that I see. He's a player. Like I'm very convinced everything the Mets had projected with him and what he can be. I think he'll be fine. He's like, I'm not worried about him. Ronnie Mauricio, to me, is also the other good news. He finally got up in the bit we saw, and I'm pulling up the numbers right here with Mauricio. What we saw from him, right? 248. He gets you 2 homers, but he's not a power guy. He also gets you nine ribbies. 35 total bases. He's a guy, 25 hits in the time he was up in the month, right? And 101 at bats. He's a guy that I look at too, where also I love the speed on the base pads with him, something I also value very highly. I like speed. That's why I like to see what Francisco Lindor did. He has a good feel for the game. I think the defensive stuff he can figure out too. What I'm saying is the shortcomings with him and Alvarez, I think those guys can figure that out. I think if you're a Mets fan, you got to be happy. Those are 2 good position players. Invest in them if you're the Mets. Give them time. Let them grow. We talked about not seeing that with the Mets. But I think those 2 guys, you could see why they were highly touted. They'll get a full major league season. I think Alvarez will be better. I'd be stunned if Alvarez doesn't hit for a higher average next year. I think he'll just see the game better. It'll calm down. Mauricio, I think next year, if he gets time to play, it's going to be a little up and down for him. But I like his feel for the game. Especially at the plate, especially running the bases, I think the defense will come. He'll be fine. The other baby Mets, Brett Baty, I think also will be fine. I think he ended the year hot. I thought that was good for him. I think he needed the time where he went down. I think the Mets did the right thing there. He came back up. He clearly learned some things. If I'm the Mets, don't worry too much about third base. Let him go in as a starting third baseman. Let him not have that pressure. The job is yours. If he struggles, then you take it there and see. But next year should be a year where you should be looking at Alvarez and Mauricio and Baty more of like, hey, the jobs are yours. Let's see what you can do. Alvarez already knows the job is his. But Mauricio and Baty, let's see what you can do. So I think with some of these young players, you're fine if you're the Mets. Now you talk about the vets. Francisco Lindor is one of the best shortstops in baseball. The guy's fantastic. He's going to defend his position. He'll give you 30 home runs. I like how he's got the average up as well, too. Stealing 30 bases. I've always said I wanted to see him back to being a little bit more aggressive on the base pads. That is also part of a Buck Showalter mentality, so you see that as well there, too. I'm happy for that. Pete Alonso, what I like to see is, all right, can you become more disciplined at plate? I am not a fan of Dave Kingman-ish type players, so I think you'd like to see him be a little bit more. And here's the thing. We know Pete can hit better. We've seen him hit about 260, guys. We know that he can do this. That's all I think if most Mets fans would say, be like, hey, man, you're going to give me that 40, 45 home runs, and in a really good year, maybe even more, fine. But can you give me 260? Can you get those doubles numbers up? Can you hit the gap, drive some runners in? That's what you want to see if he can be able to do, and that's going to help him. I think he's just got to be a little bit more disciplined. It can't be all or nothing with the home run. I personally, as a baseball fan, don't believe in that kind of baseball. I don't think it works. I think it limits you in the playoffs when the pitching gets better. So I think that's it. So there's positives there. You also mentioned another one, Jose Quintana. I think it's a big positive on the pitching side. Obviously, Kodai Senga is a huge positive. You and I remember we talked in the preview. I love that signing for the Mets. it has proved out to, I think, even be better than the Mets probably thought.
Oh yeah.
Now you got to start wondering, is he an ace? Maybe if you did that and what you signed him for, that's a huge win. Um, you saw some things from McGill down the stretch, as you mentioned. For me, with him, it's like, yeah, he should have a shot at the 5th spot going into the season next year. He's just got to put it together for longer stretches and be consistent. That's what the Mets haven't had with somebody who's been that 5th or 4th starter. You just haven't seen one of those young guys be able to put it together. This is even going back to Steven Matz. This is inconsistency, right? Just haven't been able to see that. So I think, some of the other guys you mentioned, Lucchesi, Peterson, we may have seen enough from those guys. I don't think they're it as 5th starters. I think McGill has a chance. I'm actually was impressed to see, because it's not just pitching and putting up the good numbers. He's been through a lot of ups and downs, but the mental fortitude to then get that done at the end of the season, I think he wanted it to be. I think he wanted to do that at the end of the season. So, we'll see. But if you're a Mets fan, there's things to be excited about. Diaz will come back. He's still going to be one of the best closers in the game. The Mets clearly have to fill other things around their bullpen. I think there's things to be excited about. It's not all doom and gloom. And I think the Mets fan base has to be patient with some of these young players. And I really preaching that more about Brett Beatty than anything, because I think you got to be patient with him. I think he's learned some things. Let him calm down, get a full spring training where he knows he's a starter, and take it from there. Look, was it a disappointing year for the Mets, Anthony? I know you'll say that as a big Met fan as you are. Of course it was. Was it the worst year? No. And the reason it wasn't the worst year is because they accomplished a couple of things. One, got some young guys up who needed some experience. Two, they realized with the older veteran players that were not producing, particularly the pitching in Scherzer and Verlander, time to cut ties, move off it. They realized it wasn't sunk cost. If you were trying to run it back again with those guys next year when it didn't work, probably wasn't going to be good. Then you'd sound like a Jets fan that's hoping for Aaron Rodgers to save them a year after an Achilles injury, when you know that probably isn't likely. The Mets at least are saying, you know what? Eyes on the future, got some experience. It ain't that bad, Mets fans. That's all I'm saying. It's not that bad.
Before we wrap up here, and with Brett Beatty, they need to, and I think I talked about this with you when we did the shorts. I said that they need to make a decision. Are they going to let Brett Beatty grow and go with him? Yeah. Or are they going to try to find a replacement? And like when they tried to get Correa in here, or they brought in Eduardo Escobar, they need to make that decision. Let the kid grow and try to, get through this with the next year and a half, maybe, or go in a different direction, bring in a free agent and go that way. So we'll see what happens there. But they definitely need to make a definitive decision, because now you're messing with the mentality of, what's going on up here for Brett Beatty. You don't want to. He's a young kid. He's just starting out, and you want him to feel confident that he's going to be the guy and get that opportunity, that fair opportunity that a lot of other players have gotten. So we'll see what happens there. And, one last note, I keep saying this is keep going around to Buck Showalter. It's like the Buck Showalter hour, but a lot of people said, he didn't care about the young players. He didn't care about the kids. He only wanted to play the veterans. And if that was so, when Francisco Alvarez came up here, he didn't care about the offense. He said, I want to see how he plays defensively. I want to see how he catches the pitchers. I want to see how he frames. That was the first thing that came out of his mouth in that press conference as soon as Francisco Alvarez came up. I think it was for opening day for the home opener. Francisco Alvarez proved his worth, right? He proved his worth behind the plate. And what happened? He got more playing time. They could have easily went back to Tomas Nido. When Omar Narvaez came up, they could have kept Gary Sanchez. They could have even brought up Michael Perez. None of that happened. He did start taking time away because the kid's young, and, wear and tear on a catcher. It happens. Catchers are like running backs to me. Their shelf life is not long unless you are Yadier Molina, and you take care of yourself like that. But, he did prove with Francisco Alvarez that he did care about these kids. So, maybe he didn't give the opportunity to Vientos at the time. And Beatty got every opportunity to hold on to third base and he didn't. So, there's that.
Oh, yeah.
And Mauricio I think he played every day except for, I think he had a stomach virus and he was out for a game or two. Besides that, Mauricio was playing second. He was playing third. I mean, he got every opportunity to play. So, it wasn't, like you said, it wasn't all bad this season. And, Buck wasn't all to blame. He did change the culture, and hopefully that continues with David Stearns and the new regime, this new era again for the New York Mets, the David Stearns era.